Hello, this is Grace Clark. Okay, my talk is Lessons from a Career in Signal Processing, Things I Wish I'd Known When I Was Young. And you can kind of get the idea of what that's about. I just wanted to show you this kind of fun thing from what the world of acoustics was like before signal processing. This is a World War I soldier from Britain listening for airplanes to come and attack from Germany. Okay, number 4 here. That's just a contact information for myself. I retired from Lawrence Livermore Lab in October 2013. This next view graph is a brief resume. Just shows that I used to work at Lawrence Livermore. For 2 years, I was at Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey on sabbatical as a visiting research professor. Spent a year doing research at Davis on sabbatical. Was at the Caltech Jet Propulsion Lab. I went to school at UC Santa Barbara and Purdue University. And you can read the rest of it there. Okay, next. This just is a summary of some of my technical projects and specialties. I do signal processing, statistical signal processing, estimation, detection, automatic target recognition, sensor fusion, communication, control. And so you can take a look at that later if you like. That just gives you an idea of my background. My current research is focused on nonlinear, non-Gaussian signal processing problems. And I'll just let you take a look at that on your own. Now, for the agenda of the talk, for the agenda, what this talk is about is things that I wish someone had told me when I was young. These ideas are often more important than technical knowledge in your career. Your technical knowledge is great, but you'll often find that your biggest problems come from things that you didn't learn in school. And so I'm going to try to help you with that. I've got sort of a philosophical approach, and I try to show you some common gotchas, I call them, and how to cope with them. And I've put together some things I call Clark's Laws of projects. They're kind of silly and fun, but they're also very serious. So you have to kind of laugh at yourself, and that's the gist of that. And I'm trying to use some real examples from real-world projects and horror stories that I've been involved in or had my friends tell me about. I've had friends tell me about things, and then I've been involved in things, and you'll see both. So my general agenda is to start out talking about general issues that routinely scuttle projects, including the fundamental law of projects violated, and I'll show you that. And then after that, I'll talk about a few specific signal processing issues you're likely to face in your career, and then talk about general project and career issues. So here we go, next slide. I have to put in a disclaimer. These are my opinions only. They've been useful to me. I hope they're useful to you. I've watched hundreds of projects get scuttled because of fundamental errors that could have been avoided, and not just where I've worked, but at many places. And most of these observations apply not only to signal processing projects, to projects in general. So I hope you find them useful. And of course, any one of these topics could spawn a book. This is a compact summary of key issues, so I can't cover everything, obviously. But I'm going to show you some good stuff, I hope. Next. Okay, for the introduction, next, I'd just like to start with Clark's Law of Career Absurdity, and that is that most of the time, one's career resembles a big Dilbert cartoon. And maybe you've already witnessed this in your life, I don't know, but you can see why Dilbert is so popular, because he relates to so many people. Keep in mind that Edsel Murphy is alive and well in most engineering systems, and I refer to Murphy's Law, of course, if anything can go wrong, it will, and all the corollaries of it. I call him Edsel Murphy because it reminds me of Edsel Ford. Ford named their Edsel car in 1959 after him, and it was not very popular, and they only made them for a couple years, I think. So things can go wrong in your engineering systems. Now, for my part of the world in signal processing, my observation is that signal processing packages allow us to leverage our efforts through powerful tools. They're wonderful. And today, everyone is a signal processor, just about, because you can buy MATLAB, you can get Python, R, S, C++ libraries, IDL. There's all these codes out there that allow people to use some very good knowledge developed in signal processing. When I was younger, digital signal processing was new, and we were inventing it, basically. We had to write our own packages. We didn't have those kinds of things. But now everybody's a signal processor, and that causes some problems. First of all, nobody wants to pay for research anymore, it seems, or take time to do things right. Managers want quick and dirty work an awful lot. You're lucky if you're not in a situation like that. And the biggest problem is that these tools now allow us to make fundamental thinking errors with more speed, more devastating effect, and more confidence than ever. So it's really easy when you don't really understand an algorithm to use it improperly, and that's what I'm getting at. You really need to understand the algorithm as well as you can. And I see people using codes a lot, and they do it improperly because they don't really understand it, and it leads to all kinds of problems. So that's what this is about. Next. I'd just like to say that quick and dirty usually doesn't work. You can see I have a bias against that. For every problem, there's an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. H.L. Mencken said that, and I totally agree with it. It's really easy to get involved in a project and think that it's going to be simple, and it ends up not being that way. Of course, ignorance is bliss. My dad always said, there's nothing more frightening than ignorance in action, and that's certainly true. It's important to try to understand what you're doing. Now, part of the solution to all this is to try to pass on technical folklore, that I call it. I call it folklore because it's a bridge between theory and practice. It's necessary for real laboratory work, but it rarely appears in journals because reviewers reject it as well-known or trivial. You know, nobody will publish it. But of course, if it were well-known, there would not be a problem. So what do? The School of Hard Knocks teaches technical folklore, but at a very high price. And that's how you usually have to learn it. So I'm trying to speed up the process a little bit and help you a little bit. I hope it turns out that way. Okay, so my plan is to tell you things I wish somebody had told me when I was young. As I said before, I believe that senior people ought to contribute new ideas and research results, pass on wisdom, inspire people as possible, and that motivates me. I believe that a man's got to know his limitations, as Dirty Harry said. I love theoretical algorithm research and simulation studies, but I also love building things that work. Now, I assume that most of you will someday do signal processing work or lead or manage people who do. And so I'm hoping that this may help you. And I believe I can tell you some things that have the potential, at least, to save you a lot of stress. Next. So is my wisdom useful? Well, there's an African proverb that says when an old person dies, it's as if a library burns down. That's why I try to pass on to you some of the wisdom I've gained over the years. You're remembering all that wisdom, aren't you? I never tell Grandma she's fat, even if she asks. So there you go. Now, who do we believe? You don't always believe everybody. There's a friend of mine, Fred Followill at Lawrence Livermore, had a great quote. He says, "Nobody believes a theorist, save another theorist. But everybody believes an experimentalist, save another experimentalist." And that sounds kind of silly, but by golly, it's true. I've certainly observed that in my career, and it helps me to remember that. Okay, here are some general issues that routinely scuttle projects. I'm sorry, I forgot to say next there. Okay, let's look at the next view graph. So here are some key factors that cause project and career problems. First of all, you got people problems. And all these things involve ego issues. You always run into political acrimony. You got turf wars, budget wars, pecking order fights. You see that everywhere. Oftentimes the wrong people are assigned to jobs for various political reasons or lack of personnel reasons or various reasons, but it happens a lot. I see a lot of situations where people have an unwarranted gung-ho, can-do attitude. I call this hubris, because there's a tendency for managers to reward people who have a gung-ho, can-do attitude, and that's great. It's really wonderful. However, you got to know your limitations, and that's where the problem comes in. Sometimes you see people with unethical conduct. You hope that doesn't happen too often. Most of the time it doesn't, but when you run into it, you've got to recognize it and try to stay away from it if you can. Now, the 6 phases of a project, I'll show you that in a few slides here. That's one of the things that really causes problems. Okay, another that causes career problems and project problems are violating the fundamental principle of projects, and I'll show you that in a moment. This involves situations where you have paradoxical project and technical requirements, and it's related to the uncertainty principle, and I'll show you why. Next. Okay, this hubris, economic pressure, career pressures lead to foolish behavior. You're eager to please your management and your sponsors. Fear drives this, desire for career progress, excess gung-ho, can-do attitude. Sure, we can do anything. I can name that tune in 2 notes, you know. And the idea that management best practices can solve any problem, well, that's just not true. And usually, or very often at least, the program manager who got the project started, let's say it's a 2, 3, 4-year project, 5 years, will move on to the next project before the deliverables are due. I've seen that a lot. Remember JFK's quote, he says, just because there's a problem doesn't mean there's a solution. Next. Okay, here's a fundamental principle of projects. It's sometimes called the project triangle. That is, 3 basic factors involved in a project are time, quality, and cost. As people often say, faster, better, cheaper. They want everything faster, better, cheaper. But those things are at odds with each other, as we all know. We cannot maximize all 3 of these conditions simultaneously. Once any 2 are chosen, the 3rd one is automatically determined. So that means you can pick 2 of them, but you can't pick the 3rd one, because once you pick 2 of them, the 3rd one just automatically is determined. So if you want something fast and better, it's not going to be cheaper. You know, you can see all the combinations, and I imagine you've all witnessed situations like this, because we all do every day. Next, this is related, I believe, to the uncertainty principle, where, like the uncertainty principle in physics, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, is that more precisely a position of particles determined, the less precisely its momentum can be known, and vice versa. So the product of the position standard deviation and the momentum standard deviation is bounded by a constant, Planck's constant, over 2. Now, this was kind of fun for me, because when I was in school at Purdue, I saw some graffiti on a bathroom wall. They made a little Kilroy, like they made in World War II, these Kilroys. And the graffiti said, Heisenberg may have been here. And I thought that was kind of fun. So I thought I'd share that with you. Next, the uncertainty principle in signal theory gives us trade-offs also. Everything involves trade-offs. So a signal cannot be both time-limited and band-limited. So if you have a sine wave, for example, in the top there, its Fourier frequency spectrum is a delta function. And if you have a signal that's a delta function, its Fourier spectrum is a constant. so it's broadband. But if you have trade-offs there. So if you have like transient signal down at the bottom, then its Fourier spectrum is band limited. So this gives you an idea of the trade-offs are everywhere, and we all know that. Next. Dilbert's project uncertainty principle is frighteningly valid. He says, the gal says, I need a description of your project and its projected cost. Well, that's impossible. The project uncertainty principle says if you understand a project, you won't know its cost, and vice versa. You just made that up. Well, that doesn't make it wrong. Well, it's frighteningly true. I've seen it many times. So next, here's a horror story about faster, better, cheaper. First of all, I took a course called the Bradford Project Management course a long time ago, and that's where I first saw this. But in the 1990s, the big slogan everywhere was faster, better, cheaper. NASA, DOD, and DOE, various places were going around saying that a lot. And I warned my management that that's foolish. You can't have all three. And I got a talking to about my attitude on this. And they said, well, that's how you have to talk to sponsors now. And I just wouldn't do it. I refused and I paid for it. You know, I got beat up a little bit for it. But that's okay. I still hear this kind of talk, but not as much these days. I think they've learned their lesson. One of the reasons is there was a NASA Mars Climate Orbiter spacecraft in 1999. It was $125 million. They used faster, better, cheaper as a slogan, of course, all through the NASA and the DOD and everywhere. Well, this thing crashed into Mars, and the reason was they figured out later they forgot to get their mixed units of distance to jive. So Lockheed Martin was using English units, and JPL was using metric units. And so the crashed into Mars when it wasn't supposed to, of course, and it was a tragedy. I mean, that was just horrible. At least nobody died, of course, but it was a very bad thing. And you know, I argue that, well, it may have been faster and cheaper, but it certainly wasn't better. And next, I always like to say, take time to anticipate problems and plan ahead. Next, here's Clark's law of projects. Now this is another thing. It always takes longer than you expect to do a project. So estimate the actual realistic time required to finish a project as follows. So first, make your most generous guess, assuming Murphy's law is in full effect, then multiply by pi. And that'll get you close, usually. And, you know, if you don't have time to do everything, you end up working nights and weekends to make it happen, and busting your chops. And anyway, I like to use this rule of thumb, and it's worked pretty well for me. Next, the law of project do-overs. There's never enough time to do it right, but there's always enough time to do it over again. You see this in management a lot where, you know, political reasons, things get done, and, you know, they never want to give you enough time to do the job properly and you know, get the quality high. But if it fails, then they always come up with money to do it over again, and it just seems like this almost always happens. So watch out for this. Next one. This is always good advice. I believe quality is economy. Do it right the first time, and you'll get dividends from that. It's like buying cheap things and ideas that's generally not effective in the long run. So let's go next. Clark's law of overkill. Don't use a sledgehammer to drive a thumbtack. So generally, you want to use the simplest solution that's effective. You got to measure your performance properly, but you know, don't use a sledgehammer if you can just use a little. If you can just push it in with your thumb, you know, don't use a great big complex nasty algorithm, for example, when a simple algorithm will do. Sometimes it's tempting to do that because it's fun to do something that's a sledgehammer, but you know, don't do that. Next, okay, human nature and ego issues. Here we go. Next, Clark's law of career egos. I argue that most career problems are caused by someone's ego. So make sure it's not yours. Do a self-egoectomy. So just cut your own ego out and put it on the table, and try to stay away from that. Avoid letting your ego drive your behavior, and try to focus on the highest good. And it's very difficult to do because the ego is a very strong thing, but I try to look at the long run, and this has helped me over the years. I've made the mistake of letting my ego get in the way and always get burned. So that's my advice. Next, human nature can sometimes be problematic, of course. Gilbert's boss says, what's the biggest risk with your plan? He says, it's people. They're terrible once you get to know them. He says, well, don't get to know them. So I tried that with you, and it didn't work. So, this is funny, but people can be the biggest problem in a project sometimes. Next, here's another one. Lou Holtz, the former football coach at Notre Dame and various other places. I saw him on the Johnny Carson show years ago, and he said this quote, and I wrote it down. I just thought it was terrific. He says, I don't tell people about my problems. He says 20% don't care, and the other 80% are glad I've got them. And I, unfortunately, have learned that lesson. It's absolutely true. Don't whine about your problems, because there's some people out there, at least, who will use that information against you when you complain. Next. So the way I argue things should be done is when needed, ask for help. It's always good to ask for help. Put your ego aside and ask for help. But be careful who you ask, and don't whine about your problems. Some competitors will use your vulnerability against you, and believe it, they will. Pick a person who have your best interests at heart, a trusted mentor, for example, and most of all, develop a network of trusted colleagues. It's really important to do that. Go to conferences, get to know people at other organizations, get to know the people in your organization. Surround yourself with people you trust. Anyway, next. Okay, here we go. 6 phases of a project. Now, I first saw this back in the late 70s when I was a young person, and I thought it was a joke. Somebody had it on their wall at work, and I thought it was pretty funny. But I realized after a while it's not funny. It's deadly serious. This is real. I've seen it countless times. People get burned sometime. Everybody gets burned by this sometime. When somebody asks you to work on a project, figure out which phase of the project you're in. Okay, here's the 6 phases. So enthusiasm, everybody starts out excited and enthused about the project. Pretty soon, though, or at least after some period of time, there's disillusionment, because you start running into all the difficulties and the trade-offs and the limitations of physics and all those things that cause you problems, and people start getting disillusioned. After a while, they panic. It's like, oh my God, we're never going to get this to work, especially in big projects. Smaller projects, you've got more control over things. If I've got my own project, I can avoid this. But if you're in a big project and somebody else is running it and lots of people are on it, this just always happens. People panic and they go, oh my God, this isn't going to work. And then they say, search for the guilty. They try to look for somebody to blame. And then usually they can't find the right people, and they punish the wrong people. People get punished who had nothing to do with what was going on. They'll just be a fall guy and a whipping boy, and that kind of stuff happens a lot. And then the ironic thing is after it's all over, you'll get praise and honors for the people who said they didn't want to participate in it. So the non-participants get rewarded. So, well, you were smart not to get in that project or something. I mean, this stuff happens. It really does. The way I try to think of this is that when somebody asks me to work on a project, I try to assess which phase they're in. And if they're in phase 3 or later, I try to avoid the project. You can't always do that for various, political reasons, and you want to help your organization, all those things, but just be really careful. So next slide. Okay, I've got a poll question. Have you witnessed the 6 phases of a project? You can respond yes or no. And the folks at the IEEE will collect your responses and gather them and let us know. Okay, next. Punishment of the innocent is real. This is a funny Dilbert that just was very recent, actually. All of our options lead to doom. The only thing we can control is who we blame. Well, that sounds right, about right, except for the we part, and that's the way it goes. I mean, unfortunately, Dilbert's got it right on this. People routinely project their own problems onto others, shift blame. People cover for their own failures, especially managers do this. I was once blamed for not doing something I was never asked to do. Nobody ever came and said, do this. You know, it was never any part of what I was supposed to be doing. I got involved late, and then they blame me for something that I had nothing to do with. So, I mean, this happens a lot. The big thing is don't do it to other people. You know, don't let this corrupt your own life. Let other people do that, but don't let it mess your life up. Next view graph. Clark's law of career behavior. Tell me how a man is rewarded, and I'll tell you how she or he behaves. I should have said a man or a woman, but you get the idea. Is people try to optimize their performance index, whatever that is. If you want to create a healthy reward system, try to allow lots of people to get credit. Don't give all the credit to the project leader. Don't give all the raises and recognition and all that just to the project leader. Distribute the credit, distribute the rewards, and that'll help everybody. But oftentimes this doesn't happen. Next. New ideas scare people. Fear and momentum cause resistance. This is a wonderful quote by Arthur Schopenhauer. It says, all truth passes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed. Second, it is violently opposed. And third, it is accepted as self-evident. This is absolutely true. When I first published my PhD thesis work, reviewers didn't want to publish it. They opposed it, made all kinds of nasty comments. Later on, I got it published. Now, there are like 15 book chapters and book sections that talk about the work I did, and they made me an IEEE fellow for it. So now it's accepted by everybody. But the first reviewers just panned it. So this is the way it works. Next. Most of the time, this guy, Howard Aiken, is right. Don't worry about people stealing your ideas. If your ideas are any good, you'll have to ram them down people's throats. It's true. I've had a few ideas stolen from me, mostly in the early stages from some competitor, but usually this applies to when you're publishing or making products. That's when people are recalcitrant to accept new ideas. And the not invented here is a big problem. Next, there's another world of acoustics. Next. Okay, specific signal processing issues you're likely to face. Next. Generally, the goal of signal processing is to improve the interpretation of measurements. So you have models, that give you some kind of simulated measurements. You have physical processes, sensors, signal and image processing algorithms that give you measured or estimated results. Yes, and if you can, you want to put those models into all 3 of those boxes. Try to have models that cover all 3 of those. Next. The real purpose of signal processing is to understand the meaning of signals. I got to meet Richard Hamming. He was at Naval Postgraduate School years ago. He's a wonderful guy. He has a famous quote. He said, the business of computing is insight, not numbers. And that's absolutely right. People can take signals and numbers and statistics and interpret them in many different ways, but the important thing is to get the true meaning of what's going on. So next. Generally, methods for classification, inverse problems, and fusion, those kinds of things that we do in signal processing are either data-based or model-based. In the data-based methods, we have little prior knowledge available, so there's, for example, physics and models and prior probabilities, things like that. And I won't go into the details there, but they're based on the data. Then we have model-based methods like over on the right. These things include physical models that are folded into the signal processing algorithms themselves. And the model-based methods, if you have models, if you have good models and they're valid, then those are generally the best way to go. The data-based methods are methods that you use when you don't have models, and you just need to do the best you can. And oftentimes they work and they solve a lot of good problems. But in general, I prefer the model-based methods if they apply. Next, George Box is a great statistician, just passed away not too long ago. He had a famous book, Box and Jenkins, is wonderful. He says essentially all models are wrong, but some are useful. So remember that. Remember that all models are wrong. The practical question is how wrong do they have to be to not be useful? And this is really profound because you can't trust your models too much. After all, the model is trying to model something in the physical world, and you just can't model everything. You just can't. But you can develop models that are very useful and allow you to solve problems, and that's what you got to focus on. Next, here's a short list of common signal processing gotchas. I see this all the time. Errors in sampling continuous signals create discrete time signals. You get aliasing, resampling. Errors, people confuse resolution with sampling. They're two different things. Resolution has to do with like optical resolution, and sampling is just how many samples you take of a signal. So those are two different things, but people confuse them all the time. People like to focus on playing with the latest cool new fad processing algorithm while they ignore the fundamental physics. Sometimes people interpret bumps and wiggles in Fourier spectra as important features of the physical process when they're actually artifacts. Some of the signal processing algorithms create artifacts in the data, and you have to know how to tamp those down, and you got to understand what they mean and how to deal with them. That's a big trade-off. Not recognizing when a problem is ill-posed. That's especially in inverse problems. I'll show you some more about that later. Applying algorithms without first making sure that the underlying assumptions are satisfied. People do that all the time. They'll apply an algorithm in MATLAB, don't really understand the algorithm, the theory behind it, and every algorithm has assumptions that are made when the algorithm is derived. You assume the system is linear, you assume the noise is Gaussian, you assume all kinds of things. And if you don't get that right, if you try to apply something, especially to a linear, an algorithm assumes a linear system, and you apply it to a nonlinear system, for example, it's not going to work very well, and you won't know why not. The biggest thing is data chasing. Let me flip to the next slide here. There's a fellow named Jim Candy, who is my big mentor at Lawrence Livermore. He's one of the best signal processors who ever lived, in my opinion. He's a terrific guy. He coined this term data chasing, and it involves using ad hoc algorithms. You know, ad hoc just means that you create especially for a given situation. It's not a general purpose algorithm. So data chasing is what you do when you know little or nothing about the physical processes created the data. You have no models or prior knowledge. You have no access to controlled experiments in which a signal processing answer is known ahead of time in control experiments. So you don't have the modeling, simulation experiments, no real-world control experiments. But you go and apply filters, FFTs, and other algorithms data, and you still can't explain the meaning of the results. Next, this has serious consequences. You don't really understand the meaning of the processing results. The results are inconclusive and or not useful. The results are often not repeatable by other researchers. If the algorithms work, you don't know why they worked. If the algorithms don't work, you don't know why they didn't work. You don't know what to do to make things better, yet you've now used up your time and your money. And now you're in a big fix. The results are usually not extensible, so you can't extend it to some other problem. Can't use the approach on other similar applications. You have to start fresh for each new problem. can't use existing systems for new problems. It's a big deal here. So that's that's why I prefer model-based approaches, because they can often mitigate these issues. Next. Data chasing leads to enormous waste and stress, okay? I've seen it countless times. This is when people come to me and they ask, hey, what signal processing magic can you do to save our project? And that's happened to me so many times I can't count them. They usually have a couple of weeks or less of funding at this point left, and the project review is scheduled. I tell them, okay, well, I'll apply my special SESP algorithm. That's my sow's ear to silk purse algorithm. And that'll make everything better. And then everybody laughs, and then I tell them, well, really, what you have here is a phase 3 project. You're in panic mode. And really, you should have included me in the project at the beginning. If you'd let me help you plan the experiments and the data acquisition, you would have had data that I could have used. It's like now the data, I can't use it. It's useless. But then I have to attempt to put a Band-Aid on a gaping wound, and then I get blamed if I can't save the project. So if possible, refuse to do phase 3 projects. This is just one good example. It happens a lot. It's just human nature. I'm not trying to beat up on people, but this just happens an awful lot. Next. Here's Clark's law of heroic effort. If you bust your chops in a heroic effort for a manager, you'll generally be repaid with compounding gratitude. And what I mean by that is some manager tells you, hey, help me save my project, and I know it's going to cost you all your nights and weekends, and it's going to hurt your health, but I'll remember this at raise time, or something like that. They'll make some promise like that. So you bust your chops, ruin your nights and weekends and stuff, and then later on they say, well, I didn't tell you that. You know, it's unbelievable. I've talked to all my friends who've had this. I'm not the only one who's seen this. Everybody I know has experienced this kind of thing. But the awful part is the ingratitude you receive will not be linear. It'll be exponential. Compounding gratitude, usually including blame for something irrelevant. Anyway, so watch out for this. Next, the poll question. Have you ever been blamed for a project shortcoming that was clearly not your fault? There's your responses. Let the IEEE know. So next, here's some ways to avoid data chasing. Big ways to really study the physics of the problem, use all your prior knowledge of it possible, because any prior knowledge can help you in signal processing. Build and validate models of the entire physical process that produces the signals being measured. Build models and algorithms that have a solid theoretical foundation, not just ad hoc algorithms. First principles models, non-parametric models or black box models. Parametric models, where some structure is known or assumed, is where you estimate the parameters. And most of all, involve a signal processing specialist in the very beginning parts of the project, including basic system design and especially experiment design, because that's where things usually go wrong. Usually people go out and build a new instrument or something, they take a bunch of data, and they don't think about how to process it until they get to the end of the project, and they bring in a signal processor, and it's too late by then. So do it in the beginning. Next. Okay, here's Clark's law of measurement quality. The best signal processing is a good experiment with good measurements. Oftentimes, you just get really bad data, and the data are so bad because the experiment was bad that they're virtually useless. Next, here's Clark's law of GIGO, I call it, garbage in, garbage out. Signal processing algorithms are garbage in, garbage out devices. They just aren't going to work if you got crappy data going into them. Next, here's a friend of mine, Lawrence Klein, gave me this picture. He had another point of view on it where he saw this dumpster that said quality in, quality out. And so I like that too. Anyway, next, if at all possible, acquire your own data. She or he who controls the data controls the project. I naively thought that people would share their data when they agreed to, and oftentimes they withhold it. so that they can do their own processing. All kinds of political things happen. I've been burned on this a bunch of times. Oftentimes the data you get from somebody else will be poor, so beware. Watch out for this. Next. Clark's law of signal pre-processing. You'll spend about 80 or 90% of your time and effort preparing your data for your main signal processing algorithm, and that's if you do it right. Remember this when you write your budget proposal. You have to do a lot of pre-processing in most projects to make the data satisfy the algorithm's assumptions like linearity, Gaussianity, things like that. Spend a lot of time doing modeling, removing statistical outliers, and you'll find that most of your effort isn't in using your fancy algorithm you're going to apply. It's in getting the data ready for that algorithm. Next. Okay. Inverse problems are very difficult. Let me show you this. Most real-world inverse problems are ill-posed and ill-conditioned. Say you got a system H with an input X, output Y, and then you got noise added to it, so your final output, your measured output is U. This is your typical measurement. The system identification problem is given X and U, find H. So that's an inverse problem. The forward problem is given X and H, find Y and U. And that's an easier problem. Now deconvolution is given U and H, find X. And that's oftentimes even more difficult. The problem is that you get small perturbations in U, the output, can map to large differences in the estimates of H. And you have finite support in your spectrum. When X of T is frequency band limited, many operators, H of T, will produce the same output. So you don't have a unique solution. There's no unique solution. There's an infinite number of solutions that will work mathematically. Next. So that's called that's called ill-posed. It's an ill-posed problem. So there's no unique solution. There's an infinite number of solutions possible due to noise and distortion. And just like the guy putting in hamburger in a meat grinder and expecting to get a cow out, it's a very tough problem. You also have ill conditioning, numerical errors due to dividing by zeros in the spectrum usually. It's equivalent to dividing by zeros. Anyway, it's very difficult. Next. The approach is to regularize a problem. So that means define an associated well-posed problem, the solution of which is well-behaved and offers a reasonable approximation to the solution of the ill-posed problem. And that's the trick, is to define that well-posed problem. And I won't go into details because it's very mathematical, but this applies in just about anything. Then you apply a priori knowledge as much as you can to redefine the original problem based on those known properties of the desired solution. So this is the key, is this regularization approach. Next. Okay, let me quickly go through this. Proposals, ideas on proposals. Never just ask your manager to solve a problem for you. Clark's law, first law of talking with your boss is never go into a boss's office with a problem unless you have at least one good proposed solution. Never do that. Next, Clark's law of management decisions. Most management decisions are made based more on fear than on principle. Unfortunately, it's true. I believe this. I've seen it so much that I believe it. The biggest fear politicians and managers have is looking bad. And underestimate this at your own peril. People don't want to look bad to their sponsors, their superiors. They don't want to look bad by backing an idea that fails. They don't want to look bad by backing something the other managers don't like. Fear really drives a lot of decisions. Next, Clark's law of project funding. Project funding has little or nothing to do with how much is actually required to do the work. It has much more to do with politics, fear of looking bad, how much a sponsor has to give out, how many people or groups of sponsors wants to fund, that kind of stuff. And Gilbert has a good thing on this. Next. He says, this is my bare minimum budget I need for my project. What could you do with half this amount, the boss says. He says, fail. When can you start? I think I just did. I've said that to people a lot of times. I found this many years ago, and I've said it to people. They say, well, what can you do with half that amount? I say, fail. So what it really means is that people will tell you, I can't give you that amount of money. And so you say, well, then all I'm going to have to do is adjust my deliverables, because this budget was set up for the deliverables that I promised to produce. I have to sit down with you and figure out what deliverables I can produce with half that amount. So that's the way you deal with that. Next. Corollary to Clark's Law of Management Decisions is Clark's Law of Proposal Strategy. Make your proposal so compelling that the management will look bad if they do not support it. That's not great English, but it's true. Make your proposal very compelling. Next. Now here's arguments supporting this Clark's Law of Proposal Strategy. So what if your technical ideas are exceptionally innovative? And I say, well, this is necessary, but it's not sufficient to get management support, because I've seen this many times. You got great ideas, but that's not enough. Your technical ideas are very important to the mission of the organization. Well, that's necessary, but often not sufficient to get management support. You've got to make your proposal so good, so compelling that the managers will look as if they don't support your proposal. And that's because you've done your homework, you've prepared, you know what the boss's sponsors want. You know what the priorities of the organization are. And you tune everything. It takes a lot of time to do this, and it's not fun, but you've got to do it. If you do all this, this is often sufficient to get management support, but there are no guarantees in this world, of course. This is just the best strategy that I can recommend. Next. Okay, general project and career issues. Quickly, I'd like to say that the most important skill you can have is the ability to know what's important and what is not. Sounds trivial, it sounds silly, but it's absolutely true. So many people are brilliant, but they don't know what's important. You gotta know what's important in your organization, what's important in your own life, all these things. Next. Clark's Law of Survival. If things are bad enough, write a Pearl Harbor letter. So that means it refers to an old story. It's probably a myth. I'm not sure it's actually true, but there was a story about some admiral at Pearl Harbor who warned ahead of time of the attack and wrote a letter warning of that attack. And then after the attack, when everybody else was getting punished for letting the attack happen, he was spared because he'd written this letter ahead of time. So if things are bad enough, you can actually write a letter to the management and let them know, hey, I just don't think that this approach is right. You know, it's just not going to work. Here are the problems with it. Spell it out. And then that might give you some level of protection. Next. Always tell the whole truth about your ideas, the advantages and disadvantages of them, not just the advantages. I see a lot of people who only talk about how great their algorithm is or great their idea is. But always remember, a half-truth masquerading as a whole truth is an untruth. People will find out what the trade-offs are later. Just let them know ahead of time. Next. It's always a good idea to under-promise and over-deliver. Next. Clark's Law of Mental Health is having options. Always keep your resume updated and build your network of colleagues around the world. Go to conferences, get to know people, have options. Always have your fishing net out looking for project opportunities or job opportunities. Write down your project proposal ideas so you'll have them. Don't forget them. Always prioritize your personal health, especially the mental and physical health, because that's your biggest option right there. You got to be healthy. Next. And okay, my conclusions next. Don't let fear drive your agenda. Focus on your principles and your health. Have the courage to live by your convictions. Most of all, preserve your integrity. Once you've lost your integrity, you've lost everything. Live by that. It's worth it. Next. Okay, finally, always level your sponsors and journal paper readers. You write a journal paper especially. Level with them about the limitations and trade-offs of your techniques. Tell them, even if they don't want to hear it, tell them even if it might cost you funding, because it will cement your credibility, because the full truth is so rare. People like it in the long run. It's a matter of integrity and ethics. Once you've lost your integrity, you've lost everything, as I said before. You can sleep at night. In the short run, you'll take a beating. Somebody will beat you up for this. But in the long run, it'll be good for your career and your life, because the laws of nature always punish exaggerated claims. If at all possible, avoid data chasing. Sometimes your management will demand compliance with unreasonable ideas and promises. Tell them that you are data chasing with little chance of a good result. Level with people about this. Anyway, that's it. Good luck. And send me your horror stories if you like. If you got a good story, send it to me. So that's it. And here's something fun to look at the end. There we go. Thank you very much.